Um, I want to welcome all of you to our 19th annual Heritage Day. We're very blessed to have you all here today, and I hope you enjoy the day and enjoy our keynote speaker, Bill McFarland. I know, you come from Topeka, right?
Yes, yes.
Rob Reeves made all the initial contacts and everything, so. But he's going to speak on the 8th Kansas Infantry. This will be one presentation and a different one on your second one.
Right.
So I want to welcome Bill to our Heritage Day, and we thank you for taking the time to come.
Oh, glad to be here. Glad to be here. So I am speaking on the 8th Kansas Infantry. I'll be doing two different talks. So if you're around and want to come to round two, it's on the same regiment, but I'm going to focus in on different personalities because I'm more interested in the people that made up the regiment. They're more interesting to me than just the regiment itself. This is a photograph that belongs to the Kansas Historical Society there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But it was taken in July of 1862 when these Kansas boys were in Mississippi there. The 8th Kansas Infantry, this is a painting that was done, started out as home guard. And when they enlisted, they promised that they would be issued uniforms and weapons and so forth from the federal government, but they would serve only in Kansas. And so at the beginning, that's exactly what happened. They were stationed along the border of Missouri, where there had been some problems. They were at Fort Riley and Fort Scott and Fort Leavenworth. And so they were stationed by companies around various areas. But as time went on, they said, well, we're home guard, we're supposed to only serve in Kansas. The government said, well, the general who told you that did not have authority to do that. So you'll be like any other regiment, and we'll send you wherever we need you. And ironically, this group that thought they were never going to leave the state traveled farther than any other regiment from Kansas, and were the very last regiment to be mustered out at the end of the war. One of the personalities there was the Colonel John Martin. He was from Atchison, and one of the companies was from Atchison. He's a remarkable person and did a lot before he was actually old enough to vote in elections at that time. He came to Atchison when he was just 18 years old, and Atchison was originally a pro-slavery town. And he bought a newspaper and changed the name to Freedom's Champion, and so changed not only the name, but the editorial bent of the newspaper as well. He also, in 1858, served as the secretary of the Wyandotte Constitutional Convention that wrote the Constitution that we operate under today. And he'd gone there as a reporter, and they said they gave him a job, and so the handwritten copy of our state's Constitution is written in his hand. And so I read a lot of letters that he wrote home to his sister and compared that, and yep, that's the same handwriting there. He was a delegate to the 1860 Republican Convention up in Chicago, where they nominated Lincoln. And actually, he voted for Seward, who was someone else that they were considering. And so I think he finally switched as things became apparent. But we think about politics being a little contentious today. It certainly was during the Civil War as well. In fact, Abraham Lincoln came to Kansas in 1859 before he ran for president. And he visited Atchison and Leavenworth, and had some family that lived in Donovan County, visited them. And I read that Martin didn't even mention that Lincoln was in town in his newspaper in Atchison. I thought, that can't be right. And so I went and I looked, and the day before, the day of, the day after, judging by that, you could never tell that Abraham Lincoln was in Atchison there, but he was. And so, in the summer of 1861, he helps raise the 8th Kansas Infantry and becomes their lieutenant colonel there, and will serve with them throughout the rest of the war. The commander of these guys here that are known as the Indianola Company E of the 8th Kansas is this guy, Captain John Grealish. He was an Irishman-born man and lived in Wabunsee County and was a stonemason there. He had recently served 5 years in the 8th United States Army, and so he had some military training, and that was a plus to all these raw recruits and Kansas farm boys that were coming in. And so at the Battle of Chickamauga, he's severely wounded, but stays for a while and resigns about a year later. What I'm going to do is give you the history of 8th Kansas by looking at these 8 individuals that are there. For many years, these guys were not identified, even though this picture appears in almost every Kansas history book from, for the last 50 to 60 years. But this was given as a gift. This tintype was given as a gift to Samuel Reeder, who was someone who lived in Indianola, Kansas. I was talking earlier that Indianola is about in North Topeka where the Goodyear tire plant would be today. But it was a rival of Topeka at the time. Topeka in the 1860 census had about 100 more people in it than Onega does today. So it wasn't a huge town by any stretch of the imagination. Samuel Reeder and these guys in the picture had all been part of a pre-war militia group called the Fremont Guard, after General Fremont. And they, get my watch out so I know what time they were there to kind of keep an eye on their neighbors, because Topeka was a free state town. Indianola originally was founded by pro-slavery factions. And they heard a rumor that some of their pro-secession neighbors were going to collect arms from the state of Kansas, and then when Missouri seceded, as they assumed it would, go over across the border and fight for the Confederacy. And so they formed their own group that met at the schoolhouse every Saturday for drill. And that group became about 25 young men, became the nucleus for Company E of the 8th Kansas Infantry. And so someone in this group sent this picture back to Topeka, to Samuel Reeder, and he dubbed it the Indianola Jayhawkers, is what he called this picture. So that's what I called it as well. Reeder's an interesting guy. He kept a journal from the time he was 13 until and he was born in but he came to Kansas in 1855 and died in 1914. And so he wrote in his journal every day. And he was an artist, so it's a heavily illustrated journal as well. And so I'm going to go through these individuals here and see what happened to them as they went along. Well, they did in the spring of 1862, they did get shipped east and were headed for the fighting going on in Tennessee. And so this guy right here was actually not a member of the 8th Kansas. He was a member of the 7th Kansas Cavalry, but both regiments, or portions of both regiments, were shipped out at the same time. So they traveled together for a time. This guy's name is James Hunter, as you can see. He was a 29-year-old farmer when he joined the 7th Kansas Cavalry. And in September of 1864, well, in August of 1862, the 7th Kansas Cavalry separates, and they're fighting as cavalry in a different part of the Army, and so he will be the first one to lead that group of 8. He has some health problems later on and will be transferred to the Veteran Reserve Corps, which was a part of the Army for soldiers that were not able to do the heavy marching and fighting, but either because of illness or wounds could still guard things behind the lines and do those kind of things. So we're down to 7 people there. One thing I might mention, we could quote here, as Reeder received this photograph or this tintype, he wrote back to his friends in the 8th Kansas and said, "Should any of my friends who have sent me their picture perish from the influence of climate or on the field of battle, it will be a mournful consolation to me to know that I still retain their images." And indeed, some of the people there would not return from the war. The next person to leave was the youngest one in the picture. Their ages, he was 20 years old. The oldest guy, I think, was 30 or 31. And his name is Henry, actually that says Davis. His name is actually Davidson there. But he was born in Kentucky, and his family was pro-secession, although they changed some once they were out here in Kansas. And as they were traveling through Kentucky, Henry disappears, and he's listed as a deserter. And so the Army is still looking for him 2 years later, when they come to Indianola, thinking he might have returned there. And his father, when he heard that Henry had deserted, said, I would rather he had died than be a deserter. But he did change his mind later on. He heard from his son, and his son said that he was visiting some of his relatives in Kentucky when the 8th Kansas moved out early in the morning, as they had a tendency to do. And as he was trying to catch up with the regiment, was captured and paroled. Whether that's true or not, a lot of people in the regiment said that they thought he probably had actually deserted, encouraged by his relatives in Kentucky. But Reeder, the guy who received this, made a note in his journal later on in 1911 where he's talking about Henry and the desertion. And he says that Henry later on becomes a doctor and died in Missouri in 1911. So in the end, Henry made good, I guess we would say as well. The group traveled on to Nashville. Because the 8th Kansas was scattered all over the state, when they left the state, only 5 of the 10 companies went east to begin with, and the others stayed out here for nearly 6 months there. But they ended up in Nashville, and since they only had 5 companies, they were one of the smaller groups in their division. And so they ended up doing provo duty for about 6 months here in Nashville. And Nashville this was their brand new capital. You can see it looks kind of like a construction area there. There's some tents there where soldiers might stay. Colonel Martin had an office in this building right next to Andrew Johnson, who will later on become the Vice President of the United States under Lincoln, and when Lincoln is assassinated, become the 17th President of the United States. Martin said of Johnson, he was one of the noblest, hardest men I ever knew, and a sincere, earnest, devoted patriot. When these Kansas Jayhawkers show up to kind of be the police officers in Nashville, folks in Nashville weren't real excited about that. I don't think they knew anything about these guys in particular, but they'd heard of Bleeding Kansas and all the kind of things that had taken place during the territorial period there. But the 8th Kansas won a reputation for their good behavior and for making other people do the same. And so while the 8th Kansas was there, they patrolled the streets, the theaters were reopened, and the streets were safe. They also were stationed at various places like prisoner of war camps, hospitals, and other as security in those areas as well. And so 6 months later, as the rest of the regiment caught up with the 8th Kansas, they haven't seen the fighting that other regiments have, so now they're one of the largest regiments in the area, and so they're needed at the front, so they're called to the front. The mayor goes to the generals and says, take 2 other regiments, but leave the 8th Kansas, because they have seen the value of that. So this group that really wasn't wanted to begin with is treasured as they leave, and they leave with a big parade with the streets lined with people waving handkerchiefs and hats, and their band playing John Brown's body there. One thing before we leave this all together here. There we go. While they're at Nashville, an incident happens involving Colonel Martin and the guy who was their Sergeant Major, William S. Kane. He was an Englishman guy there. At age 16, he'd gone with his father to Australia, to the gold fields there, and then back to England, and in so doing had circumnavigated the globe. He had gone to a military school where they taught tactics and learned fencing and other things of that nature. Came to the United States in about 1855. By 1856, he's living in Atchison, Kansas. Actually has a stereotypical event happen. A tornado or strong windstorm knocks out part of the house he was living in, and he's knocked unconscious, almost like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. But anyway, he is the Sergeant Major there. And once all the companies of 8th Kansas are there, now they're entitled to have a chaplain, and they didn't have one. And so the chaplain's duties, riding home to family members of soldiers and things who might have died or other kind of things like that, fall on the Sergeant Major. So he goes to Martin and asks him to write the governor, asking for a chaplain. But for some reason, Martin doesn't want to do it. Maybe he said, you've got along this far without it, why do we need a chaplain? So Kane writes to the governor himself. So he goes over the colonel's head. And he says, we have this whole regiment here, we need a chaplain, and he suggests that a nice Methodist man would do nicely. And so, not long after that, Methodist preacher from Topeka, Chaplain John Paulson, shows up, and Martin is not happy, because he realizes what has happened, that he's gone over, that the Sergeant Major has gone over his head. And so he calls, Kane in, and he goes up one side and down the other. Now, Martin was only 22 years old when he becomes the colonel, so he's a young guy, and I think it's important for him that his authority be recognized. And he threatens to bust Kane down to the ranks again, down to a private. And Kane stands his ground. He says, you are within your right to do that. He says, but if you do, I will appeal it to the regimental council and to the people of Kansas. And so Kane kept his rank, and chaplain stayed there. Actually, what he threatened to do was he said, I'm sending Paulson back, and you're going to pay for his trip to Nashville and his trip back home as well. So he was ready to send him there. Paulson was in his 40s, 42 years old, which doesn't sound that old to me, but for that time, that was one of the oldest guys. And some of the people didn't think that he would cut it, that he wouldn't last, because the job was somewhat missionary-like in nature, I guess I would say. And so he does, though, within 6 months after arriving, he makes a friend of the whole regiment by his tender care of the wounded and soldiers after the Battle of Chickamauga. And so he had the whole regiment as his friend. And he did stick. He stuck to the very end, and he's with the regiment when they mustered out. After the war, he becomes, he had been a pastor in Topeka and Manhattan, also in Fort Scott. In 1876, he runs for governor under the Prohibition Party, and he doesn't win, but he died in 1893 and is buried in the National Cemetery at Fort Scott. All right, so they leave there.
What did he die from?
General old age there. Wasn't specific there, so. Let's see. As they are leaving Nashville, in fact, I think it's on the very day that they leave Nashville, this guy right here, Corporal Volney Brown, joined the Army when he was 22 years old, born in Vermont. He was the regimental wagon master during much of the time. He ends up dying of disease just the very day that the rest of the regiment is leaving Nashville, June 7th, 1863, and beginning the campaign that will lead to the Battle of Chickamauga there.
What disease did he die of, do you know?
A lot of times they didn't specify, but something that, there were lots of different things. I mean, you got people that are unvaccinated coming together in large groups that they hadn't before. And so a lot of people had measles and mumps, a lot of dysentery and things like that. But I'm not sure that they specified exactly what he died of, but died of some kind of disease. And so he's the first one to die. Actually, the biggest killer of the Civil War was actually disease. For every soldier that was killed in battle, 2 died of disease. So twice as many people died of disease as did of the fighting. Which even that's an improvement over the Mexican War from the mid-1840s, when 9 out of 10 casualties in that war were from disease.
Wow.
So I taught history for 44 years, and the kids would oftentimes ask me, you know, wouldn't you like to live back then? And I always said, you know, I'm very happy to live in a place that has heating and air conditioning, modern plumbing, and modern medicine there. So he's the first one to go. So now there are, let's see, he's the second one out. During the fighting at Chickamauga, this guy right here, Will Wendell, becomes a casualty. He was part of the 9-man color guard at Chickamauga. At the Battle of Chickamauga, they fought back and forth. They captured prisoners, and then prisoners escaped. Sometimes they were captured. They were fighting in the woods where it just all of a sudden came upon the opposite side at point-blank range, and it was their first major battle, and they went into the battle with over 400 people, 406 soldiers, and 243 of them became casualties. So not necessarily killed, but killed, wounded, or prisoner. And so if you do the math, that's almost a 65% casualty rate, which is high there. Chickamauga took place over 2 days, September 19th and 20th of 1863. And it's the bloodiest 2-day battle, and basically the second bloodiest of the war. Antietam was the bloodiest 1-day battle, Chickamauga the bloodiest 2-day battle, and Gettysburg the bloodiest 3-day battle that they had. And so he had been a blacksmith apprentice in Indianola, worked for one of the other people in the picture there, member of the Fremont Guard. At Chickamauga, he's part of the color guard, and very early in the fighting, the color guard is mortally wounded. And several of the color guard proposed, carrying him back behind the lines to a hospital or whatever. but he turns to them and says, "Never mind me, boys, keep the flag to the front." And as the regiment advanced, the flag was 6 paces in front, and it remained there until a halt was called, and then the flag went back. And that was the guide. That was what you followed into battle there. I did write a book on the 8th Kansas Infantry, and that's what I chose as my title, Keep the Flag to the Front, the story of the 8th Kansas Infantry. Wendell grabbed the flag, and there was a brief argument between he and another member of the color guard over who was the most senior and would be the one to take the flag, but he ended up winning the argument, I guess. Of the 9-man color guard, 7 of them are either killed or wounded at the Battle of Chickamauga. Well, Wendell is wounded 7 times and still refused to pass the flag on to someone else until he could no longer stand because of loss of blood. And as he was carried to the rear, the flag would be in front, the battle, part of the battle line, right in the middle, and then behind that would be where the colonel was located. And as they carried him by the colonel, he looked up at Colonel Martin and said, "Colonel, have I done my duty today?" And he died in field hospital later that night. Later on, the GAR post in Holton, Kansas, just down the road here, was named for Will Wendell. And in the cemetery just on this side of town is a large obelisk that says Will Wendell Post GAR. So he was remembered later on as well. His brother was also there. His brother was not in that original photograph that I referenced, but his younger brother, he was just 18 years old when he joined the area there. At Chickamauga, he is Colonel Martin's orderly that would run errands back and forth. He would be mounted at the time. That might be the reason that he has a sword rather than a rifle there. He was referred to as the pet of the regiment, kind of a young person that everybody liked, knew, and so forth. So Martin tried to protect him and kind of tried to order him to the rear to be out of harm's way. But he refused to go, without reason. Well, later on, Martin's horse is wounded, and as he is in the process of taking the horse to the rear to bring up another one, he stops to shout encouragement to the group as they're beginning to falter a little bit, and a bullet enters the left side of his chest and exits through the right side, shattering his right arm. So he does survive, but so much bone is taken out of his right arm that it basically is useless and hangs limp at his side from there on. He's taken to the field hospital, probably the same one where his brother has been taken, and he is captured when that hospital is overrun during the next day of fighting. After the war, he comes back to Atchison, Kansas. For a time, he works for Governor Martin, who is a journalist. He works with several other journalists, marries a local girl, and then goes off to work one day and never shows up. And they had no idea what happened to him. He actually, I don't know what was going on, but he basically takes off. He ends up in the east for a time there, but he had a young wife and kind of leaves her behind as well. So anyway, he works for a news agency in New York City for a time, and he dies in Rockford, Illinois in 1912.
Did he ever remarry?
I think he did. And pension records are really interesting to look at, because sometimes, if you went from one side of the country to the other, you could reinvent yourself. And they had no idea what your history was other than what you told them. And so the ones where there was a discrepancy, like two wives in different parts of the country are claiming a pension record, and they had to write all sorts of information about why they should get it. There's some really interesting stories in some of those things. When I go to look at pensions, they're that thick, and it's kind of like panning for gold. There's a lot of stuff to go through, but when you find those stories that are nuggets, it keeps you going there. So I think he actually did remarry. His wife divorced him after a time, and I know she remarried there in Atchison as well.
So were they from the Holton area that building's named after him?
Well, this area where Indianola was, some of these guys lived in 3 different counties without ever moving. Calhoun County to begin with, we were talking about counties earlier. Shawnee County for a while, Jackson County for a while, then back to Shawnee County there as the boundaries of these changed. Now, he wasn't from Holton, but one of the guys that we'll talk later on moved to Holton and becomes the mayor there. And so that's why I think he was instrumental in getting that GAR post name for his former apprentice there. Let's see. So, Chickamauga is a Union defeat. They end up retreating to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Don't know if you've been there, but it's surrounded by hills. So the Confederates basically had the high ground. They're down in the low area there, not a real good position, military position, with cut off from nearly every direction except for one road coming in and out. The whole army there was on 1/3 rations there. One of the members of the regiment found some moldy hardtack, which is like a big hard cracker, and said that he ate it as though it was the best of cakes. And so these guys have been wearing the same clothing for the whole summer campaign. It's all threadbare there, and they're there with very little supplies coming in. But as time goes on, they do start receiving more and more reinforcements. Grant's Army of the Tennessee arrives, so it about doubles their size. And they're able to open up some other routes there. Meanwhile, the Confederates are dug in on the high ground overlooking the town. And as they had some political problems, and Longstreet, who had been there at Chickamauga from the Army of the Potomac up in Virginia, he breaks off, or gets permission to break off and attack Nashville. So as the troops are building up, Union troops in Chickamauga, the Confederates are weakening their forces by sending some off. But they hold the high ground, and that doesn't seem to be a bad idea. Cyrus Grant here is a farmer, as most of the people were back then. He joins the 8th Kansas on the rebound. The widow that he had been sparking marries someone else, and so he could join the French Foreign Legion, I guess, so he joins the 8th Kansas. At Chickamauga, he received a slight wound in the shoulder, but he again will be another one that dies of the disease while on November 21st there in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
He dies in the hospital?
Yes, he dies in one of the local hospitals. Now, there appears to me to be something written on the bottom of it. Might be just reflection, but I've enlarged it, I've kind of reversed it, I've tried different things. I cannot make out what it is. It's not his name there. It's not Cyrus Grant that I can tell, but I haven't been able to make that up there. Let's see here. Well, while they're there in Chattanooga, Grant's Army of Tennessee, Grant trusts Sherman more than any other officer, so he orders Sherman to attack from the Union left there. His attack stalls out, and so he orders the Army of the Cumberland, that the 8th Kansas was part, to do a diversionary attack in the center. And so they do, and they get to the rifle pits there was kind of the picket line, and take those. And the pickets, retire on up to the top of the hill there. But at the base of the hill, that's a nasty place to be, because they're receiving cannon shot and gunshots from the top there. And so finally, supposedly without orders, there was a spontaneous charge. We can't stay here, and they started charging up the hill there. And so the Confederate engineers didn't do their finest work at Chattanooga, because they placed their fortifications at the top, their breastworks, on the crest of the hill, but not the military crest. The military crest is a little bit lower, and so at the crest of the hill, they can no longer point their cannon down, and they can hit the bottom of the hill, but as they're coming up the hill, they're coming in underneath the guns. And the riflemen up at the top can't fire at these guys without standing up on top of the breastworks and exposing themselves there. So they lose the advantage of the breastworks there. So they, Kansas and others, overrun the position, and that's called the Battle of Missionary Ridge. They then are headed to where Longstreet was in Knoxville, and they get to Knoxville that they thought was under siege, and they find out that, well, Longstreet had left there. So they had a, 30 or 40 mile march in the snow, and so they go back to Chattanooga. And so now, they're still not resupplied. They said in the whole regiment there were probably 30 guys that have a shirt. Only half of them had blankets. It's wintertime. Many were shoeless. They had ghosts of hats. Some had brims without the top. Some had the top without the brim. And then they're asked if they would like to re-enlist for another 3 years. So not the best timing. And at first, one guy wrote home, he says, I don't know anybody in my company that's going to re-enlist. But that re-enlistment came with a 30-day furlough home. And that was a big inducement. And so most of them did re-enlist, and they come home for the furlough. This guy was one of the guys that did not re-enlist. Richard Russell. He again was from Indianola. He's an Irish-born laborer. He lost 2 fingers in a Kansas blizzard there in around 1860 there. And so he did his 3 years, but he didn't re-enlist. And one of the guys in the photograph said, well, I'll talk to him. I think I can get him to do that. But he had an injury. He had a hernia. And when he explained that, the guy said, I understand. And so this guy does 3 years and has done his bit and does not re-enlist. They all get to come back to Kansas. They're here for a time. Then they go on to join Sherman and the Battle of Atlanta there. But they do that without Richard Russell. They fight at Atlanta. There is continuous fighting. For 100 days they fought there. Not one battle, but shots exchanged. In the 33 days before the fall of Atlanta, the 8th Kansas by itself fired over 120,000 rounds. And so they didn't have massive casualties any one time, but they had continuous casualties. A guy wounded here, a guy killed there. After Atlanta fell, Confederate General Hood wanted to take he headed north, trying to draw Sherman away there. Sherman continued on his march to the sea, but sent the Army of the Cumberland, that the Kansas was part, north after Hood. They're able to slip around Hood and get to Nashville before Hood can get there. And so there is a battle fought in December of 1864, and Hood is defeated there, and his Confederate Army basically, not totally destroyed, but are not a very effective fighting force after that. At the Battle of Nashville, Lewis Bryant is a member of the Color Guard. and the color guard was in advance. They talked about, you know, the shot and shell tearing up the ground around them and putting holes in the flag, and put holes in some of the other folks that were there as well. 3 of the 6-man color guard at this time were wounded, and Lewis Bryant is wounded twice, one in the chest and once in the leg. And so he is discharged because of disability. So at this time, I don't know if you've been keeping track, there's just one of those 8 guys in our original picture that is still with the regiment. And his name is Elisha Rose. He's the oldest one in the picture. He was 31 years old. He was an Indiana blacksmith. He was justice of the peace and postmaster in Indianola there. This is a picture of Indianola drawn by Samuel Reeder, the recipient there. And Rose, that you can see there on the left-hand side, this area right here, where the flag is, that's his home. He, in 1860, the 4th of July, 1860, he puts up a flag. Remember, this is kind of a secessionist town, pro-slavery. And after he joined the Army, actually it was July of 1861, after he joined the Army, somebody steals the American flag from there. His house is the post office. That's one of the reasons for the flag. And about a year later, when 4th of July is approaching again, somebody chops down the flagpole so that, you know, nobody else will raise another flag. Rose is a sergeant in the picture there, that he goes on to become the lieutenant that commands Company E of the 8th Kansas Infantry there, and he is the only one of those 8 that is with the 8th Kansas at the end of the war. In all of Company E, that originally would have had around 100 men, only 16 are left at the end of the war. And so they muster out in, after the war, they had signed up for 3 years, or the end of the war. The war ends, but then they expect to go home, but instead they're shipped down to Texas, the whole Corps, the 4th Corps. They're to kind of keep an eye on Maximilian, a French ruler of Mexico who had taken over down there. And so he comes back here. He's the one that moved to Holton, this gentleman right here. He later becomes the mayor of Holton, police judge, works in real estate. He dies in Holton in 1892. And I think it's because of his work, this guy right here, his work, that they get the GAR post named for Will Wendell, who had been, he was a blacksmith before the war. This guy was his apprentice. And so in 4 years, this group, at least the one guy in this group, at least, he was there, traveled 10,750 miles there.
And that would be all on foot?
I'm not sure, because sometimes they did travel by steamboat. Like to get back east, they took the Missouri River there, and to go to Texas, they came down the Cumberland to the Mississippi there. So I don't know if all of it was on foot. Anyway, there. And so as time went on, they did join together in groups. And this is not any of those guys. These guys are all from Company C. But they formed the GAR post that would lobby for treatment of soldiers and their widows. There were 6 different GAR posts that were named for guys in the 8th Kansas, including the Will Wendell one there. And so if you're interested in knowing more about the 8th Kansas or more about these guys there, this is the book that I published. And I have an Omega special of $10 a book if you want one. But that's pretty much concludes my talk, but I'm open to any questions you may have. There are lots of other people there. I'm doing another talk later this afternoon. I'm talking about the state of Kansas, but I'm talking about other individuals that were there. Again, using lots of photographs.
Was a visit to Indianola, visit Lincoln did come to Kansas?
Atchison, Leavenworth, and then a couple smaller towns in Donovan County. And so he was here only a short time, but he was in Kansas when was this February, I think, or December of 1859, when John Brown is hung for treason back at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. So he has a little news blurb that's printed in the papers about that. This was before he was officially running for election, but well known for Lincoln Douglas debates and things that had happened a year or so earlier.
I want one of your votes.
What's that?
I want one of your votes.
All right. We can work that out. I've got
Trading.
Yeah, we can do that. We're kind of trade prisoners.
I wasn't here when you started. Can I ask for your teaching career with it?
Oh, yeah. I taught 44 years in the Washburn Rural School System, southwest of Topeka. Taught mostly middle school social studies. So I got to do Kansas history things, and so it's right up my alley. So I retired about 4 years ago.
Yeah, wonderful. You can put up with middle schoolers, man. Yeah.
They're better on the inside than they look from the outside. That's what I thought when I started teaching. Okay, I'll teach this group for a year, then I'll get a job at high school. But once I got in, I really liked that age students. So.
Good.